Thank you, Megan, and greetings, everyone. My name is Mike Shawcross, and I'm an archivist on ICPSR's metadata and preservation team. Today, I'd like to provide a brief introduction to ICPSR's new API for discovering and downloading our metadata. I'm grateful to be joined by my colleagues Megan Chenoweth and Jared Lyle, who are on hand to help answer any questions you might have at the conclusion of the presentation. Before we start exploring the API, I'd like to take a few moments to and explore the needs and context that led to its development. It should come as no surprise that metadata exports are important to a wide variety of users. Individual researchers are among the primary consumers of ICPSR metadata records, but they are by no means the only ones. Other data repositories, libraries, data catalogs, and organizations that aggregate datasets or build discovery platforms and similar research-related tools all rely on our metadata exports. In addition, we've arrived at a moment where machine agents, not just search engines, but a wide array of AI tools, increasingly rely on discoverable and downloadable metadata records. We might ask why metadata exports are important to each of these users and their respective use cases. And the most basic and fundamental reason is that they make data more fair. Specifically, metadata exports make data more findable. They help people and software agents discover relevant information. They make them more accessible. They provide information about how and where to access data and highlight any restrictions on use. They make data more interoperable. They promote sharing between ICPSR and other organizations so that ICPSR metadata works in other catalogs and online databases. And they make them more reusable. They describe study methodologies and associated data so they may be reused, replicated, and/or analyzed by subsequent researchers. For more information on the FAIR principles, please go to www.go-fair.org and click on FAIR Principles. ICPSR has provided access to its metadata records for more than 50 years, going back to the annual Guides to Resources and Services that were distributed to member organizations in the early 1970s. We made the decision to develop a new tool for metadata exports due to a confluence of numerous factors. First, our previous metadata exports were limited to a handful of metadata standards and required extensive IT involvement to customize and manage. The new API, on the other hand, will support a broader range of export formats. We currently provide metadata exports in the API that conform to the DCAT US, MARC XML, and Dublin Core standards, and we plan to introduce Data Documentation Initiative, or DDI, Codebook, DataSite, and schema.org in the future. The API also supports more complex queries for metadata exports. In the past, users could only search for metadata records of interest by a study identifier, but with the API, they can search by those identifiers, as well as dates published or modified, subject terms, geographic coverage, principal investigators, and more. Finally, ICPSR previously supported multiple export pathways, each of which use different conventions. The API, by contrast, simplifies and standardizes the process of accessing metadata records, thereby making the export process easier for users while reducing the administrative burden on our IT staff. Now, we've mentioned this term API a number of times, so let's pause and better define it here. An application programming interface, or API, is a standardized way to access data or services provided by a system without having to directly interact with underlying databases or user interfaces. They are used in a wide variety of contexts because they support reuse across tools and workflows. They enable interactive and automated use by humans or machines, by which I mean simple computer scripts or even complex AI agents. And they improve the consistency and reliability of that access because they provide a set of rules that govern interactions with the system. Most APIs are web-based and use standard HTTP requests, which is the same underlying technology used by your web browser. For more information about APIs, please go to www.postman.com and search for what is an API. So now that we've reviewed these basics, let's take a closer look at the new ICPSR metadata API. At a basic level, it's an order form for metadata, and there are two standardized steps to place an order. In step 1, The user specifies which records they would like to receive, as well as the desired metadata format they will be placed in. The API assigns a unique number to this request, but doesn't immediately return the records. Then in step 2, the user takes that order number and requests the actual metadata records. As the API attempts to fulfill the request, it will provide a status update and then a download link for a zip file of metadata records in Amazon Cloud Storage. Two key things to note at this point are: 1, users must register, but for free, to use the API so that ICPSR can prevent malicious actors from overwhelming our system. And 2, the API only provides metadata records for curated ICPSR studies at present. So currently, no self-deposited data in Open ICPSR is available through the metadata export API. However, we are actively working to broaden the scope to include all of our studies. Another point I want to note is that ICPSR's metadata export API can be used in a number of different environments. The easiest way to get started with it is to use the Postman API platform, which is available in your web browser or as a downloadable desktop application at www.postman.com. If you are a non-technical user or just want to quickly test different features, this is a great option. You can also interact with the API directly from your computer's command line terminal or as part of a computer script. For example, a small Python application that requests and retrieves metadata records. Users can also employ the API within more extensive manual or automated workflows, such as a process that retrieves metadata records from ICPSR and then imports them into a local library catalog. We're now going to take a closer look at the API's operation. However, given the variety of mechanisms available to interact with it, we're going to focus on the key concepts and definitions that are broadly applicable. As we previously noted, the first step in using the API requires the user to define which records they would like to receive. There are 4 main options here: the identification of one or more metadata fields that will be queried to identify records of interest, the values for each specified metadata field that will be used in the query, how those query values will be matched when the API searches for relevant records, and finally, the format of the returned metadata records. There are 9 metadata fields that can be used individually or in any combination to identify ICPSR studies of interest in an initial API request. These fields, which the API refers to as attributes, include the study identifier, a unique numerical value used to identify and track ICPSR studies, subject terms, a controlled list of social science terms maintained by ICPSR and used to indicate topics related to the data, geographic coverage, which is the geographic locations where the data refer or are related, principal investigator, the key people or organizations responsible for the data, date issued, the date on which the study was originally released. I skipped funding organization, which is the sources of funding that supported the data. And back on the other side, we have date modified, the date on which the study was last updated. Title, the official title that describes what the data is about, its geographic scope, and the time period it covered. And finally, owner archive, the ICPSR archive or repository to which the study belongs. For any field that will be included in this initial request, the user must also provide one or more values that will be used to find matching records. And I want to note that users may submit a query that uses a single metadata field or combine multiple fields for a more complex search. For instance, a user could employ the owner archive, geographic coverage, and subject term fields to request all studies in the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging, that is the owner archive, that relate to the state of California, the geographic coverage, and include the subject term housing. As I mentioned before, the API also includes options that control how provided metadata values should be matched in potentially relevant records, with one for date-based fields and another matching option for all other fields. For date fields, we have general concepts of matching before or after the provided date value. So, less than will match records where the date is before or earlier than the provided value, and greater than will match when records have dates that are after or later than the provided value. It's important to note that these greater than and less than options function just like in your elementary math. They will not match on the provided date value. But the API does provide greater than and equal to and less than and equal to options, which will include the specified date in query results. All other fields may be matched exactly or loosely. Here the operators are in, which only makes exact matches, and contains, which results in looser matches. To briefly illustrate, let's consider two queries for subject terms. If I want to search for the term health and I choose exact matching, I will only match the subject term health, not similar terms like healthcare or health education. If, on the other hand, I search for consume with loose matching, the API will return results that include that string consume, things like consumers or consumer attitudes. So the looser matching will provide more results, but they might not be as precise as the exact matching. The final option that users may select are the format or schema of the returned metadata records. The API currently provides three choices: Mark XML, which presents traditional Mark catalog records in XML so that libraries and service providers, like Clarivate, can easily import ICPSR metadata into their discovery systems. DCAT US, which is a US government standard developed to promote interoperability by making it easier for agencies and data portals to share and find datasets. And Dublin Core, a widely adopted metadata standard that provides a simple, flexible way to describe resources, supporting discovery and reuse across libraries, repositories, and digital platforms, which is also expressed in XML. ICPSR plans to make additional export formats available in the future, which will include Data Documentation Initiative, or DDI, Codebook, a leading metadata standard in the social science research community that captures detailed information about studies, their methodologies, and associated datasets. DataCite, a widely adopted metadata standard used to register our DOIs for research outputs, thereby enabling consistent citation, attribution, and long-term access to datasets and other scholarly materials. And schema.org, an essential standard for embedded structured metadata on homepages, which enables search engines and other services to understand, index, and present information about datasets, publications, and other resources. So, after a user has submitted a request with the search criteria and the desired export format, the API will return a response. If everything looks okay, the API response will include an order number for the request. On the other hand, if there are any problems with the request, the API will return an error message. And it's important to remember that all APIs are governed by rules about how to correctly submit a request. And ICPSR's metadata API is no different. As a result, you would see an error message if you misspelled a metadata field that you wanted to query, or if you requested an unsupported export format. In step 2 of using the ICPSR API, the user submits another request, this time for the records themselves. The order number received at the conclusion of step 1 will be sent back to the API, at which time it will start working to match studies with the provided search criteria. If any matches are made, it will then generate records in the desired export format. Please note that all matching and record generation occur on the fly, and so queries that return a lot of records will take longer to be fulfilled. As a result, a user may have to repeat this step several times, because if the API is still working, it will only return a status update. A status of pending means that the order is in the API's queue, while processing means that the order is being actively fulfilled. When the order is done, that is, the status has reached completed, the API will do one of two things. If records have been matched to the search criteria, it will return a download link for a zip file of metadata records. On the other hand, if the search criteria do not yield any results, the API will return a message that 0 metadata documents match the query. The download link that you received at the conclusion of step 2 points to a single zip file in Amazon Cloud Storage that contains all of the metadata records that match the query. After downloading this zip file to a local workspace, the user can extract it using any standard compression tool. Inside the archive, you'll find one metadata record per study, formatted in the desired export standard. Each file is clearly named and includes the ICPSR study identifier as well as the metadata standard. For example, an exported Dublin Core metadata record for study 39477 would have a file name of PCMS underscore study underscore 39477 underscore Dublin Core.xml. All records are fully schema valid and ready for immediate import into local systems or reuse in downstream workflows. As we noted earlier, our new metadata API is designed to make ICPSR data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. To do that, we are working to make the API a single source of truth for all ICPSR metadata exports. The records you receive are authoritative. They've been generated directly from a database that is synced nightly with ICPSR's production metadata. What you're exporting reflects what's live in our system. The API also emphasizes consistency. Each export format is built from a standardized template, which ensures that records are complete and fully valid, regardless of the format you request. Finally, there's a strong focus on transparency. The ICPSR metadata documentation portal, available at icpsr.github.io/metadata, provides complete field definitions, usage notes, and example values for every ICPSR metadata field, along with clear mappings that show how those values appear across all supported export formats. Now that we've covered what the API can do, let's look at some practical ways that you might use it in your workflows. You can import records directly into local systems, such as library catalogs, institutional repositories, or discovery platforms. You can also aggregate metadata across sources, combining records from multiple repositories to support federated discovery or broader analyses. For more advanced users, the API lets you run searches at scale, performing complex filtering, faceting, or queries that go beyond what our web interface can provide. And for those who want to analyze metadata computationally, the data can be used for text mining, statistical analysis, or exploring things like geographic coverage, subject terms, and other summaries. In short, the API gives you flexibility. You can use it for virtually anything you want, and all ICPSR metadata are available under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0 International License, so you can reuse and adapt the records freely for non-commercial purposes. In closing, we encourage you to further explore the API. Check out the ICPSR metadata documentation portal, again at icpsr.github.io/metadata, to learn more about ICPSR metadata practices and our new API. In the portal, you will find a link to the ICPSR metadata export API user guide, which includes information about how to acquire API credentials, a detailed explanation of API settings, step-by-step instructions to construct queries with the Postman API client, and helpful hints to improve your API queries. We would also love to hear from you. If you have any API-related questions, issues, or feedback, please send them to icpsr-help@umich.edu. So that concludes our prepared remarks, but we'd love to open things up for any questions.
Thanks, Mike. If anyone has any questions they would like to share, let's have you drop them in the Q&A. While we're waiting for audience questions, any audience questions to come in, Mike, one question that I had for you is whether you're aware of any future plans for API development, new features that we should be on the lookout for in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I mentioned that we're hoping to expand the number of export formats we have, so that's going to be exciting. But we're also looking at ways that we can integrate this API across our systems, especially in light of our research data ecosystem project. And so one project that's currently underway is that we're modifying the API, which currently is built for bulk metadata exports, but we're modifying it so that it will actually provide downloadable metadata records from study homepages. And that's going to be great for both us and the users. On the one hand, we're providing, we're using a single template, single mechanism for generating those metadata records. So they're going to be the same whether or not you download them from our study pages or from our, using the bulk functionality of the export or the API. But it's also great for us because there's fewer things for us to manage and maintain. So I think that's a really exciting uh, upcoming event. And we're also interested in exploring how we could use this API for other options, including maybe generating schema.org and Dublin Core to include on our study homepages as embedded structured metadata for search engines to index, or also using the API to generate DataSite XML that we will pass along as part of our DOI registration process. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that we could do with this API, and it's just a matter of kind of getting those into the development queue and hoping we can get them done in a timely fashion. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Um, I'm going to give it a few more minutes for any audience questions to come in. All right. Well, in that case, with no further questions, oh, I spoke too soon. There we do have a question in the Q&A. The project is only for metadata. Is that correct? Will you have a future plan to have an API to download ICPSR data studies?
Yeah, so I do want this is only for metadata. So, it's providing metadata records. Now, I know, and Jared and Megan, I would welcome you to hop in here. There has been some discussion about maybe expanding the range of APIs that ICPSR offers so that, we can allow users to interact with our data collections in more ways than just having to go through like study homepages and searching. But I don't know. Maybe I'll just toss it up to see if you all would have any more information about that.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. There have been discussions about providing access beyond just the study metadata. I can't say when that will go into effect, but yes, we have discussed going beyond just providing access to our study metadata.
Yeah, thank you. Um, One more question. The question is, how can librarians assist with promoting and using the API?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think I'd welcome your perspectives also. I think, one of the things we were trying to do is just raise awareness through like this webinar. We've I think we've had some information like the ICPSR bulletin previously. We talked about it at our data fair last, actually it might have been in 2024. But yeah, so I think, one of the things is just letting people know that it's available and it's out there, and that hopefully with the documentation we have, it'll reduce maybe like any apprehension like users might have, especially non-technical users about interacting with it. Because once you, especially using the Postman API platform, it can be fairly user friendly to employ. I don't know. Yeah, Megan and Jared, what do you all think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike, that anything that help with getting the word out is great. Any librarians who are engaged with ICPSR, you may or may not be the folks who are actually doing a lot of developing for the library. So I guess my suggestion would be um, now that you know, as you learn more about what's available, have those conversations with the folks who are doing development at your library. Help them think about the ways and like introduce, share the documentation with them. Start conversations at your library about, what subset of ICPSR's holdings do we think would be relevant for our users to be able to discover within our system, how might this help us kind of on the more strategic side, make the most of the relationship that we have with ICPSR. So yeah, I think being um, uh, to the extent that librarians can kind of help lead those conversations within their libraries as the ones who are most familiar with what ICPSR has and the benefit that this could bring, that would be super helpful to us.
Can I just add one more thing there is let us know. Contact us here at ICPSR, Mike and Megan and myself, and let us know how you're using it. We've built this largely based on feedback we've received from librarians and libraries on what features that they want, functionality. So if you have uh, functions that you'd like to see, let us know. If there are limitations that would help us improve, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, agree.
Here, here.
Thank you. Okay, any final questions from anyone or comments before we wrap things up? All right. Well, as we reach the end of our time together, uh, we'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for putting this together, for sharing your time and your expertise. Thank you all again for being here today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.